Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the new Sword and Shield stuff, it's all in stock over at the Potown store, so make sure you go ahead and check them out. You can also use the code OmniPoke for an extra 5% discount on your orders. For today's video, we are looking at Sableye Obstagoon. It's an archetype that I have a lot of respect for. I initially started testing it and didn't really get the concept initially, and I was trying to build it in a few different ways. I tried out a Roxy build, I tried out a build with a heap of Ultra Beasts, and tried to make it like this big sort of fast trading deck. And then it sort of came to me that, you know what, the main selling point is just trying to use Obstagoon's attack a lot of the time, and making it difficult for basic attacking decks to do much against you. So you can sort of throw this back to things like Manectric Bats, or even Landy Bats, stuff like that, but it's actually much more of a controlling archetype, and the Yveltal and Sableye come in only when needed. You don't actually need to try and race aggressively with prizes with this deck. A lot of the situations you're going to put your opponent in, it's just deal with this Obstagoon army. That's basically the game plan in a lot of situations. Let's have a look at the basic concept. Yveltal GX and Sableye, they can still do silly numbers with setup damage in play. Yveltal GX needs that exact 4 damage to be on the active, and then you can just go ahead and knock them out no matter how high their hit points are, which is insane. And Sableye V does 10 plus 60 for each counter, and that scales really, really quickly. For 2 energy, it's not bad at all, so there is some good firepower that we have here. But the Obstagoon line really is the focal point here, not only for getting damage drops on the board, but also being a main attacker in many matchups. When you're up against non-GX, or well, non-evolving decks, I should say, it's really, really easy for you to just wall people out with Obstagoon. There are archetypes out there that only play Pokemon catchers, or only play Great Catchers, only have 4 custom catchers available to them, are playing Fione as their only real means of gusting, and Obstagoon gets around that really quite easily. Like, sure, your opponent can come up with combos here and there, but we're also playing like a high Marnie count to slow the opponent down, while we can build up like other Obstagoon on the bench as well. So, you know, it feels like you can just buy a few turns obstructing here and there, setting up damage for then Yveltal and Sableye to take advantage of later, or just completely sweep the board with just like lone Obstagoon in the active and the opponent's left not having many options to get around that really annoying attack. So I do think that's an interesting option for sure. Let's look at the Pokemon now that I've sort of broken down the way I see how to play the archetype. And you can see how thick I've gone with the goons here. I've gone 4 Zigzagoon, 2 Linoone, and 4 of the new Obstagoon. 160 hit points on a stage 2 is pretty chunky. You've got that ability that when it comes into play, you put 3 counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. The Galarian Zigzagoon has 1 damage counter when it comes into play. So you can see how you can set up Yveltal and Sableye math quite easily, or just in general, start pressurizing Jirachis and stuff on the bench, or other low hit point Pokemon. Maybe if you are up against an Evolution deck, you can start using these abilities to knock out their evolving Pokemon, which is actually a really big deal. You might be afraid of a few things like Ditto Prism Star tech attackers and stuff without these abilities, but thanks to those abilities, you know, your opponent can basically never put down a Ditto Prism Star against you, which is really, really good. So you have this amazing placement of damage counters, really, really solid, and that blocking attack, I believe it's called Obstruct in English, you do 90, and during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from basic Pokemon. It's as simple as that. They're not damaging this guy, which is really insane for you. You have a dark and colorless in your attack cost, so you do have counter gain as an available option as well, which we are taking advantage of here. So yeah, I think it's an efficient attack. 90 is decent pressure, especially when you have more goons being built up in the background, which is nice. It's a slow burn, really, a lot of the time, but I do think it's a solid approach. And if you need to switch things up, if you're up against decks that have evolutions in it, you can quite easily mop them up with things like that Sableye V's Mad Nail attack, doing 10 and 60 more for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon, or that Yveltal's Doom Count GX attack. I think these are all easy options for you to deal with threats that Obstagoon may not be able to get around, or just if you're up against maybe some VMAX Pokemon or something like that, things that give up a whole heap of prize cards for you, you can try and get nice up trades on them with these 2 prize Pokemon. We also play 1 copy of Mimikyu to help out against the Mewtwo matchup. and also just deny some other abilities here and there, as well as Mew, trying to give you a nice bench barrier against sniping from a Yveltal GX. Also, it can protect against Pikarom, of course, and even Magikarp Warlord, so it protects against a lot of different sniping out in the format right now, so it does seem to be an important card. I kind of don't mind having a second copy of the Mew in the deck, just so you don't have that prizing headache, and so that you have like instant access to it, even if one is gutted up and knocked out, because some archetypes are really living on a prayer that they can end up getting rid of this Mew and starting to do snipe damage to deal with your goons, because this blocking attack can be so annoying for them to deal with. We do have 2 Stellar Wish Jirachi in here. Obviously, it's a nice consistency card that you never dislike going into, so that's always pretty cool. Another thing to bear in mind is that sometimes Pikarom will try and just paralyze with the Choo-Choo to get around the blocking, because it only prevents damage, it doesn't prevent effects. So they try and use Choo-Choo, paralyze you, and then try and like attack again into these Obstagoon. So in those sorts of situations, it's always nice to have things like Sableye and Yveltal in the back ready to rumble, but also because we're playing this mini Jirachi package, it means that we're already playing naturally a couple board and a couple physical switch, which can also help out in that matchup specifically. So as much as Jirachi is just a good card in general, it's good to note that it can help out just having switching cards in your deck to help out against the Pikarom matchup. Onto the trainers now. We are playing 1 copy of Great Catcher. Like I said, we're kind of happy to be a slow burn sort of deck, so it feels like we can just keep churning damage into the active turn by turn by turn. But this Great Catcher obviously can speed up the process against, you know, dealing with tag teams or dealing with obviously the Dene GX as well, which can always be decent. We've got 1 Ordinary Rod, as it's being translated in English, just to recover more Goon pieces and more energy cards. There are a few archetypes out there that want to remove energies from us. Things like Luke Metal, Crushing Hammers. They oftentimes are just hoping that we miss energy drops and then we can't be blocking every single turn. So the normal Rod comes in nice there. We do play 2 switches and 2 boards to help out the Jirachi engine, and I've already said how it can help out against Pikarom. We've also got 3 copies of Lillie's Pokédoll here, because oftentimes people will try and use Fione to push a Obstagoon out of the way, and if you just have dolls on your bench, then you can just force a doll into the active, and then they have to deal with that instead. So this really mitigates the effectiveness of Fione. Also, it's a great thing to just pivot into on those opening turns. You can even use... Actually, I need to go back on the slide, because the Linoone, there was something I forgot to mention. It has a hit and run attack. You do 20 and switch to the bench. So it's another synergy that we have here with the Lillie's Pokédoll. So if you just happen to start a Zigzagoon, it isn't knocked out. You know, there are some things like ADP and stuff that don't put pressure on those opening turns. You can attach to a Linoone, and instead of having to pay retreat, you can just go immediately into a doll, which is nice, because then you get to save that attachment for future Obstagoon value. So that's really nice as well as a mini synergy going on. That 20 damage doesn't seem like a lot, but sometimes it could be enough to put things in range of like a Yveltal GX in addition to some Zigzagoon drops. So yeah, 20 is actually a dangerous poke, and when you're throwing Pokédolls in the opponent's face, it's making their Fiones really, really useless. So I like having these in here. Also, just because the deck sometimes relies on Sableye and Obstagoon that are both 2 energy attacking Pokemon, just getting yourself that extra turn does seem nice for me. And then we just kit out our deck with a bunch of Ball Search. We're playing 2 Evolution Incense, 4 Quick Ball, and 4 Pokecom. I'm all about getting the army of goons out. I really do think it's important. You want to try and find plenty of Zigzagoon early so that you're threatening things like Sableye and Yveltal. And ultimately you want to have more than 1 Obstagoon ready to rumble so that you can be obstructing as a big win condition and to get the main value out of your spread damage as well. So I think the simplicity of this deck is the best thing to go for when you're a stage 2 that doesn't have any consistency Pokemon in the deck other than Jirachi. It feels like kitting your deck out with as much Ball Search as possible makes a lot of sense, and that's also why we're playing 4 copies of Rare Candy to also get those goons out as quickly as possible. We of course play a few Rosa in the deck as well, so accessing those Rare Candy will not be too much of an issue. The only other card we have here is 1 Counter Gain. I've already mentioned we have that colorless attack cost with the Obstagoon, and it's, you know, not uncommon for you to sack things like Jirachi or Zigzagoons in those opening turns, and then instantly you can punish them with Rosa plays, where you can get immediately into Obstagoon, and you can counter gain attach, and start swinging into them with that Obstruct. So I really like having this one-of option in the deck. For supporters, it's quite simple. We have 3 Marnie, trying to disrupt people from accessing things like custom catchers alongside Fion at the same time. Obviously, if they have their Fion in play, they have to be a little bit concerned that we could maybe drop a bunch of goons on it all at once. So they probably have to hold the Fion in hand and also have the customs at the same time to force us out of the way and then back into the active so they can knock out an Obstagoon. So Marnieing away their custom catcher combos as well as the Fion can always be great. 3 Rosa for really punishing when your opponent does start to take individual prize knockouts. You can just go ahead and grab your stage 2s quite easily. Gets you energy cards, which is always nice. We only play 9 physical copies of Dark Energy in the deck. So having more access to those readily available is nice, not only to physically attack with, but also to have backup Obstagoon and other attackers ready to go, especially because Sableye has a 2 energy attack cost. You could certainly consider adding in... well, you can just consider that you want to have energy drops here, there, and everywhere, so that you can just have the option to attack with all sorts of different things. And then you have the 4 Professor's Research, which is just good dump and draw that you can't really say no to in many decks. We've defended against Professor's Research by maximizing copies of all of our lines, basically, and also having that Ordinary Rod in the deck as well. So we have a lot of interplayable Ball Search cards. We have as thicker lines as possible, so hopefully the Professor's Research won't be too detrimental in many spots. For energy, as I just mentioned, 9 Dark Energy is the count that we've gone for. Should be plenty to access, especially with Rosa to dig some out through the mid-game as well. So the full list is there. It's also in the description as always, something to take note of if you want to. For tech options, there's actually been a lot. I've been exploring this deck a decent amount. I tried a few different things. I tried a Roxy build before I realized that we're not really meant to be a racing deck. When I actually tried the Roxy build, I tried to have Energy Switch Rayquaza GX in the deck so that you were even faster at getting multiple Sableye V down. I think that's a completely different build, and also with the supporter rule changes and still just access to like a powerful Roxy in those opening turns isn't great. Even if you are doing like a full-on Roxy with double Wheezing, it's only 2 damage counters on your opponent's stuff, and it's not that quick for your Sableye V. So you probably have to also merge in like a small package of goons in there as well, and space just gets super tight. So, I mean, I tried the Roxy thing. You're welcome to do so as well if you want to. Like, overall, it's more damage counters, and actually does have synergy with knocking out like Jirachis and Mews and stuff on the opponent's side of the board a bit more. So you do become a lot more aggressive, but I do think the deck just overall gets way less consistent. You have to cut a lot of your like Ball Search stuff, and you got to cut away from like Professor's Research, which is a crazy good supporter. So I'm not a big fan, to be honest. For stadiums, I'm playing none right now, and that can be punished by things like Thunder Mountain and stuff just sticking in play, and a few other things here and there. You could think about Shrine of Punishment coming in for, again, more damage counters if you really wanted to. In my opinion, if you're up against GX Pokemon, you're pretty happy because it's basically only tag team GXs, and you can just Obstagoon against them anyways. And Black Market does seem reasonable, to be honest, but when you're only playing one stadium, you have to expect your opponent will have bounces available almost every time, even with Marnie and stuff. I think possibly if I played Reset Stamp, I'd be a little bit more inclined to play Black Market. Bead is a supporter that I could certainly consider coming into the list, just to make your Sableye V a bit more aggressive and more bursty, if that makes sense. So you can bead and manually attach on the same turn and just get a Sableye out of nowhere. Like I said, my main focus is just Obstagoon in a lot of these situations, so I'm not playing any bead right now. Also, bead is like a pretty poor supporter, let's be honest. So possibly a one-off, but I'm not too certain about it. It might defend against the Luke Metal Hammers-based archetype, so that's really the only merit I would give bead, really. Dedenne GX can just give us some more Ball Search draw options so that we don't just struggle in those opening turns. But overall, it is easy prize cards for the opponent. That's why I'm not playing it. Fion of our own, just to push other things out the way. I think if we're up against things like Morpeko, it should be okay because we can just keep hitting through their dolls until they're out of dolls, and then they don't have much else to deal with Obstagoon. that might be a different story if they are playing Memory Energy and the VMAX Morpeko. I think that's the only time where you'd want Fione, so you could just push dolls out of the way and actually sort of prize race more efficiently. But at the same time, normally the Morpeko VMAX is like a one-of, and you can just try and like Yveltal GX it as soon as it comes onto the board and deals with your first Obstagoon, and then you can just move on with the rest of your game plan, basically. So I don't think Fione is necessarily mandatory. There are some single energy attackers that you might consider in the list. I've mentioned how Bead could go in, or the old Energy Switch Rayquaza GX combo could go in the list just to accelerate energies, but instead possibly having some more one energy attackers could cover up the weakness in a different way by having, you know, some power spike turns from like Nihilego or Buzzwole. Nihilego seems like a decent card, seeing as though it can revenge attack against Zacian V, also against Mewtwo, of course. Buzzwole good for Pikarom. Spiritomb can just kind of build Spite on the bench and chill to be like a late game sort of swing card if you really need it to, just because you're already going to be using Obstagoons and Zigzagoons to place damage on other stuff. The like 160 or so that you hit might be, you know, in range of things, so that could also be an option for you as well. And finally, there's some other ways of getting damage counters into play that I haven't mentioned just yet. There's a couple tools like Spell Tag and Giant Bomb. Spell Tag could be reasonable if you increase your Mew count and just try and use those opening turns of spread with Mew and combine it with Spell Tag. And there's also, of course, Distortion Door from Giratina. It's a nice discard fodder for you, whilst also being able to like pop itself into play whenever you need to. It makes your Mimikyu that much more effective as well, which you could also be considering. So yeah, just a lot of different options for this archetype. Right now I've gone as vanilla as possible, just try to make the Obstagoon the key focus. But I'm certain there will be more aggressive directions for this archetype, and there are all sorts of different ways you can try and be more aggressive, as you can see on this slide. For the matchup overview, I think Florgastolls will be very difficult for you. Yes, you have damage placement that can deal with dolls with your goons and stuff, but that will dry up, and that's going to be awkward for you. They probably will just get over the line against you. Fossil Box seems awkward. You can't really deal with an army of annoying one prize evolutions very easily, especially because they can hit for weakness on like your Sableye and stuff quite happily. Persian Box also seems awkward. The Stinger sort of play that they can make is going to be rough. You can have some low hit point Pokemon in play all at once for them to just take multiple prize knockouts against after they've used that GX attack. Quagnag again, you just don't like seeing evolution non-GX stuff really. Same for the Baby Zard. Morpeko Dolls I've put as a bad matchup just because there may be a need for them to play Memory Energy VMAX. If they don't play Memory Energy VMAX, the matchup is probably really good for you. Just something I would bear in mind. Stonejourner I've said is potentially quite awkward. They can have a bunch of basic Zygarde that can start putting early pressure on you. And then they can also move into that Stonejourner. Also, they can easily have a few in DDV in their deck, so they can undo some of that early goon damage that you try and put on stuff. And right now we don't have good means of gusting their bench VMAX either, so if you're just lumping a bunch of damage onto those things, they could just spend a turn stone gifting, and then you can be a little bit wasted in your turn. So I think Stonejourner naturally is a little bit awkward because they can try and tempo out on you and then undo some of your damage in the sort of mid-game. Rillaboom Eggrow also has some attackers like Rillaboom itself and like Vileplume and such that can actually be really annoying. So as long as they just use the Eggrow to get their stage 2s into play, then the matchup becomes very difficult because they naturally play a lot of healing stuff. And Magcargo Torkoal also seems awkward. They can try an early tempo with Torkoal and then move into their stage 1s when need be as well, and that can be quite resource intensive for you to deal with. So I think all those things are a little bit awkward. I actually should have said that Zacian Luke Metal was potentially a bad matchup as well. It kind of relies on the coin flips of Zacian Luke Metal, but I think if you're the Goons player, always let them take first prize, so you can at least have counter gain plus energy attachment available to you. Because that'll be available for a number of turns. It takes a long time for you to actually take your first like 2 or 3 prize knockout against them because of the amount of reduction that they have. So it just relies on how many Crushing Hammer flips they can get to then avoid your obstruct attack. But I think ultimately, as long as you have counter gain live, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. If they can get around that in some sort of way, it could get a little bit more awkward. But overall, I think it's a very, very slow grind. It may end up being a tie-in. in a 50 or 60-minute game or whatever. So, yeah, that's just something to bear in mind. You should just basically keep drawing and attacking into them as much as possible, and then save your Marnies just to stop deck out. That's something I would bear in mind. Don't use your Magnolias too much, because that'll just end up on you decking out against them, because your damage output is actually so weak. The only thing to bear in mind is if they do put down too many prizes, you can just move into Sableyes and stuff if they're trying to be super defensive against you. For closing thoughts, Obstagoon is crazy, man. That attack is actually super insane. It really makes me think back to things like Pyro-based decks, or, you know, we've seen Vileplume as a stalling archetype alongside Luke Metal previously be successful. It wasn't an attacking card, but it still just walled out decks. It's better to physically have an attack now, so you don't just lose to things like Stealthy Hood. So, yeah, Obstagoon has a big win condition inherently, and it's going to be awkward for opponents to deal with, for sure. So don't sleep on how annoying that card is, and make sure you have easy ways around it. The only other thing I would say really is that we don't really have any draw support from Pokemon. We don't play anything like Zebstrika, Cincino, Pidgeotto, any of those sorts of things. And that might leave us a little vulnerable to things like Trevnoir and Marnie combo, or just a reset stamp hitting us later on and being a little bit awkward. We could just run out of steam if they are able to get through our sort of strategies. So yeah, I think evolutions keep this deck at bay. I think some hand disruption things can make us have slightly worse turns than we would like, because at the end of the day we are combo based in our main attackers with the Sableye and the Yveltal, and also the Obstagoon is even a combo attacker because he requires a couple energies, he requires rare candy a lot of the time, and the physical stage too. So there's a lot of cuteness you can do with this deck. You can try and like low bench yourself with Obstagoon being like the lone man on your board the entire game and just win off of that. You can try and be more aggressive if you need to in certain circumstances in the game. So it's really going to be a difficult deck to learn and to play. It's not as obvious as things like Landybats back in the day, where it was all about setting up your math. You actually have more defensive approaches with this deck as well. So yeah, plenty of different options for this archetype. I think it is certainly going to be powerful and disruptive. I'm definitely worried about it. It's one of the reasons why I want to play Zacian ADP, so I can just take 2 prize knockouts on things like Zigzagoons and stuff, so I don't have to deal with Obstruct just ruining my day. That's just my 2 cents on the matter though. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.